Hey guys, so I was just on Twitter and I was having a conversation with someone, and because I was replying very quickly, they thought I was a bot and they didn't really acknowledge what I was saying. And so I thought I would just come on here and share what my thoughts were so that more people could hear it, and so that maybe people who actually are open to the information will be able to absorb it. So the the concept was that they were proclaiming, they were trying to justify that people have died after getting the vaccine, and they were saying just because you eat McDonald's and then you die shortly after, or I guess they said like a few weeks or a few months after, that doesn't mean that McDonald's killed you. My reply was, true, it doesn't mean that McDonald's killed you, but are you ruling out the possibility that they ate something from McDonald's that contributed to their death? And I think this is where the nuance gets missing, or goes missing, in a lot of the discussions that I'm seeing on social media, is as far as, correlation does not equal causation. I agree that, if somebody smoked a lot of cigarettes and then they died, you can't say for sure the cigarettes killed them, but you can say that the cigarettes might have killed them. Just like you can say that McDonald's might have killed them as well, or at least something in the McDonald's food that they ate could have disturbed their internal organs to the degree, and obviously, it depends on how their body's made up. But certain people's bodies have food allergies, and literally anything that we eat, if we eat the wrong thing, can cause disease, illness, and lead to death. And that is the phenomenon of toxicity in the body. So the question is, how do we pinpoint where that toxicity comes from? That toxicity, is really hard to identify, because I don't think we have the ability to zoom in on every little cell, every little organ. I don't mean little organ, but you know what I mean? Like every little aspect of a human. When they do an autopsy for someone who died of natural causes or something internal, how do they know what the actual cause of death is? They make a best guess, but that's not the actual answer. That's just the closest to the answer that the person performing the autopsy can get. But this is the part of this whole pandemic that, to me, is very confusing. Why people make the leap and say they tested positive for COVID, and then they got really sick, and then they went to the hospital, and then they died. Oh, COVID killed them. Okay? That is a big giant leap and that's no different. That's no different than if somebody ate McDonald's and then a few weeks later they died. And you could say that McDonald's killed them. You could also say McDonald's didn't kill them. But what I'm trying to say is that it's hard to pinpoint what it is that contributed or was the cause, the ultimate cause of a person's death. And because of that fact, that it's so hard to identify what the cause of someone's death is, use that same logic when saying that someone died from COVID. You can't tell unless they do an autopsy and they find COVID particles in a person's body. By the way, they haven't ever isolated, purified COVID from any person's body, ever. All they've done is they've taken a test tube or a sample of someone's, genetic material or bodily fluids, and then they put it in a petri dish and they watched it interact with other things that they put in that petri dish. And then when it did something that made it look like, oh, the death or the cell, there's a cell death happening right there, then they're like, oh, that must have been COVID that caused it. But they never identified the particle. They never had the particle all by itself. So how can you say that it exists when that's never been done? And so this is the part that people are, I think it's that their mind is, it's like they're not willing to think it through. Like, people aren't willing to think through what's going on here, okay? There's so many things that have happened over the course of the last 2 years that people just haven't thought through, and it's likely because they're in a mass panic and they're in their emotions, and when you're in your emotions, it's very difficult to think clearly. So when you break down the logic of what I just said, in terms of the fact that COVID particles have never been purely isolated, if you go online, if you fact check it, you're going to find all these things saying that it was isolated. But when you read those studies that were done, it was exactly what I just said, which is they never have the actual thing by itself, and they never prove when you don't have the thing by itself, you can never infect something else with that virus to prove that it's transmissible. So we're literally going by what someone told us that is supposedly a scientist that hasn't actually done the science to prove that the virus has moved from person to person or can move from person to person. But they have done experiments that satisfied them to the degree that it did, and enough for them to say, yeah, like it can transfer from person to person, but they don't have the evidence. So it's like they're making a best guess, right? It's the same thing with when someone dies and, they're being looked at to determine what caused their death. Best guess, okay? So that's what we're doing. That's what the whole pandemic is around, is best guesses. And to me, the fact that we're best guessing our way, it's kind of like whisper down the lane. It's like when you mess up a little bit, like you guess what the other person's saying, but you don't hear it clearly, and then it whispers down the lane. It creates an amplified guess, which is basically, it turns into chaos, because then it's everybody saying what they think is true, and it never was true to begin with. The very initial thing that was stated was never true to begin with. True in the unequivocal sense. True in the it's 100%. There's never been a true 100%, true 100% isolation of the virus. And it's only been a guess that it might be the virus, or it seems to be the virus. But that's not the same as it is the virus. Do you get it? And because there was that leap from the truth, we took a step away from the truth. Now we've taken many, many steps away from the truth. And now we're literally we're creating a whole new world based on this guess that has never been proven to be true. When you do science, you have a hypothesis, and you have to prove that hypothesis in order for it to be considered scientific fact. And if you can't prove that scientific fact, it's not fact. So we're literally trying to create a whole it's a whole mindset around this virus being real, this virus being transmitted from person to person, when none of that has been proven. None of that has been proven. And we're just assuming it's real. We're just assuming because that's how the flu supposedly spreads. That's how these other things that we've, been exposed to over our lives that, the media has talked about. That's how all the viruses spread from person to person, right? It's just fact. But what if I told you that even wasn't fact? What if I told you that has never been proven? That when they tried to prove that viruses could pass from person to person, that they never could prove it. And that's what science is supposed to be. Science is supposed to be irrefutable evidence. Okay? Gravity. If you put something here, if I have this water bottle and I drop it, this is a fact. If I let go, it's going to drop. There. That's a fact because I literally can prove it right now. If you can't prove what's supposedly a fact, it's not a fact. It's a guess. It's a hypothesis. And that hypothesis needs to be proven true in order for it to be a fact. And yet we're living in a world where everyone thinks they have the facts when they're all hypotheses or theories. Okay? They're all theories. You want to talk about conspiracy theories? How about the fact that everyone's conspiring to believe in the same theory? The same theory that the virus is real, that the virus spreads from person to person. Yet it hasn't been proven that that's what it is. And it hasn't been proven that it even exists in a scientific lab. You never had the virus by itself, then isolate it, look at it, study it, infect another thing with that completely alone virus particle. They've never done that. And then prove that thing now has the virus and now they're in a disease state. Okay? You have to prove that in order to say truly that it's a virus that is scary, that is transmitting from person to person, that exists. Like, you need to have irrefutable evidence. That doesn't exist. There's no irrefutable evidence. And we're 2 years into this, and there's no irrefutable evidence. Isn't that shocking? It's shocking to me. It's absolutely mind-blowing and scary that people haven't questioned it. So I think it's because they've been in a state of fear and panic this whole time that they haven't been able to think logically about what's going on. So this is my call to your attention. This is my call to you to become aware of what's really going on. There's a book I'm reading right now called Virus Mania that talks all about this. I highly recommend reading that book. Okay, I'm trying to remember I don't know the author's name, but I think I actually made a post on Instagram today with the picture of the picture of the book. I don't have the physical copy, I have the digital copy. But yeah, if you just search Virus Mania COVID online, you'll be able to find it. So, or Amazon, you'll be able to find it. So anyway, the point that I'm trying to make here is that we're living in the illusion of truth, the illusion of what we think is true, because it's what we've been told is true, but that doesn't mean it is true. The only way it is true is if it is irrefutably true. And every time someone has questioned the scientists, they either get censored, muted, or if they write to the scientists, they write to the labs, they say, sorry, we can't give you what you're looking for. We don't have evidence. Either they can't give it to the specific person, or they don't have the evidence that the person's asking for. They just flat out don't have the evidence. They admit it. So isn't that enough to know that something's up? That they can't provide the data, they can't provide the studies that were done that actually isolated the virus? Okay, so this is fundamental to everything. Is if you want to know whether something's true, you have to prove it to be true. And it hasn't been proven to be true. So as far as I'm concerned, it's not true. Or, yeah, it's not true. The fact that they've pushed it so hard and that they've not been able to show the evidence that it's true is evidence that it's not true. If they had evidence that it was true, then it would be true. But they don't have evidence, and yet they continue to push it, and they continue to push harder and harder with the vaccine mandates on something that is unfounded. It's on shaky ground. There's no stability. There's no foundation to these premises, to these truths that they supposedly have that are not true when you hold them up to science. So what is going on? Okay? That's what I want you to ask yourself, and that's what I want you to try and figure out. What is going on? I have suspicions and I have theories. I don't know for sure what's going on, but it seems like it's not it's not in our best interest what's going on. Okay? If you look at what's happening around the world in Australia, oh my goodness, the amount of force and the amount of violence that's coming from people or officials, governments, police, enforcing mandates, enforcing unproven, untested vaccines on people that are in experimental phase until 2023. This is crazy. This is just crazy, guys. So anyway, I feel like that was long-winded, but it's just what's percolating for me, and it's what I'm frustrated by. Is it seems like people are not thinking clearly. They're not thinking through the logic of this. Okay? Once again, fact. If I drop this bottle, or if I let go of this bottle, it will fall. Okay? That's a fact. What isn't a fact is something that when you question the scientists who supposedly figured something out and ask them for evidence that what they figured out is true, they can't provide. That is not a fact. Plain and simple. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video. Pass it on, share it with a friend. Let me know what your thoughts are, and I'd love to continue this conversation maybe in another video and in the comments. So let me know what your thoughts are. Peace.